Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Sturrock, Professor of Political Science here at Southwest Minnesota State University and moderator for tonight's Southwest Minnesota Forum. Our program comes to you from the SMSU Student Center in Marshall, Minnesota. We're honored to host 4 Republican candidates for governor and delighted to welcome a multimedia audience statewide. The Uptake is covering us on live stream through their World Wide Web, Facebook, and Twitter platforms. We also welcome those listening over KMHL AM 1400 and FM 101.7 and watching via Studio One Community Access Television in Marshall and neighboring communities. This event is sponsored by the SMSU College Republicans, who wish to thank their media partners, the SMSU Student Fee Activity Committee, and the Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce for their help with tonight's program. We're also grateful to the SMSU Faculty Association and the statewide Interfaculty Organization for providing this evening's hospitality. I'd like to make a couple of quick introductions. We have with us tonight the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Southwest Minnesota State University, Dr. Dwight Watson. Also with us is State Representative Chris Wedzinski. And also State Representative Tim Miller, who is a candidate for Congress in the 7th Congressional District. And finally, a word of thanks to a couple of Republican leaders, Craig Bishop, who is the 7th District Chairman, and Trish Pagel from next door in Murray County, who first came up with the idea of holding a gubernatorial candidates panel here in Southwest Minnesota. Tonight's forum is one step towards helping our state's leaders learn more about our region. We look forward to more discussions with elected officials and candidates of all parties as we work to raise statewide awareness of the hopes, concerns, and opportunities that we know here in Southwest Minnesota. Our format will feature a series of questions from both the audience and our media panel, and we'll finish with a 2-minute closing statement from each candidate. Our media panelists, Mike Lamb, editor of the Marshall Independent, and Dan Paluk, news director for Marshall Radio. Audience, if you have questions for our candidates, please take a card from one of our ushers from the SMSU College Republicans. Ushers, if you're around. Jesse, why don't you set them up? The cards are over there. That's one thing yours truly forgot to take care of. We'll get those cards out to you. As you write questions, just hold them up, and one of the College Republicans will come around and pick them up and bring them up to Dan and Mike. And what they will do is sort through the questions and ask, and there'll be some duplicates and so on, but pick the ones that seem to have the most general interest and applicability to the race for governor in 2018. And now, let's meet our candidates who have come a very long way, and we appreciate your trek. Getting to know us better through the windshield is how a big part of we educate people about life in Southwest Minnesota. Keith Downey, who has served in the Minnesota House of Representatives and is State Republican Party Chairman. He lives in Minnetonka. Jeff Johnson, a Hennepin County Commissioner and former State Representative who hails from Plymouth. David Osmek, State Senator and Project Manager for United Health Group. He is from Mound in the Western Metro. And Phillip Parrish, who has been a teacher, principal, and intelligence officer and comes here also from Greater Minnesota, from Kenyon. Candidates, you'll have 90 seconds to answer each question, and you can use less if you wish. We'll rotate your answers in alphabetical order with the first response coming from Keith Downey. You'll also have 2 minutes apiece for your closing statements. Please meet our timekeeper, Jesse McCardle. And Jesse, once he's finished with the extra chore I've given him, will be up here in the front row, candidates, and he'll have cards for you indicating 30 minutes, you wish. 30 seconds left, and then 10 seconds, and then a please be done card. Audience, if you'd be good enough to help us, refraining from audible expressions of approval or disapproval, so we can devote as much time as possible to our candidates. Dan and Mike, take her away. Your first question, please. You probably like this.
Okay. Good evening. We are at an institution of higher education, so I think it'd be appropriate to start with a related question. In 2002, 66% of the cost of higher education was funded by the state, and 33% of the cost was funded by tuition dollars from students. But by 2013, that ratio had flipped, so the state covered only 40% of the cost, with students covered 60%. In recent years, that balance has begun to settle near 50%. 50%, what do you think is the right balance between funding from the state and funding from tuition dollars?
Keep Downey.
Well, again, my name is Keith Downey, and real pleasure to be here. I think I speak for everyone to say what a treat to be out here at your institution and on your campus in this fine facility. And thank you, David, Mike, and Dan for co-hosting the event. Great question. Nothing more important in Minnesota, nothing we are more proud of in Minnesota than our K-12 and higher education legacy, and part of that is the statewide network that we have through the MnSCU system and through the university system. Clearly, we have had nationwide and here in Minnesota a cost problem in higher education. I think a big part of that is that we have a lot of federal dollars accompanying students into institutions of higher education. A lot of it is the proliferation of programs and endowed chairs and the like throughout the system. There was a lot of talk when I was in the legislature about trying to optimize the programs that are offered throughout the state so that we didn't have redundant programs or redundant institutions in so many places. So I think there is a cost containment opportunity, an optimization opportunity in higher education. But bottom line, the state does need to fulfill its basic obligation. We have a handful of obligations in state government. One of them is to fund our education system. So I don't know if I can give you a perfect ratio right now, but clearly the state needs to do its job to hold the institutions accountable, to optimize and to make them as effective as possible, and we also need to fulfill our obligation to fund them.
So this one's kind of personal for me because I have one son who's a sophomore in college, and I have one son who's a junior in high school and is trying to decide, not as aggressively as his mother would like, but is trying to decide what he should do next with his life, and college is one option for him. I don't know what the correct percentage is. I don't know if it's 50% or 40 or 60%. But there are a couple things that come to my mind when we talk about college or more broadly higher education. One is that we have gotten into a place in this state and probably across the country where there is simply an assumption that every kid needs to go to a four-year college. And that's not necessarily right. There are many kids who choosing a four-year college like this fine school is absolutely the right choice for him. There are many kids who don't need that. A tech school would make more sense for them. Going into an apprenticeship program or seeking a trade would make a lot more sense for them. And unfortunately, as a society, we seem to say that unless you go to that four-year college, you are not successful. And I think one job of a governor is to use the bully pulpit to make sure that all kids are making the right choices for them, not the choice that society has placed on them. We should be so proud of kids who make the choice that makes sense for them, as opposed to just always assuming it has to be a four-year college. So to me, I think whether it is 50% or 40% or 60% doesn't matter as much as the fact that we are encouraging our kids to make the choices that are best for them, not sticking them in the slot that society has decided they need to be in.
Well, thanks for the question. And I think part of the problem is that we start having a proliferation between the state universities and the U of M, that we pit St. Cloud State against Southwest State against Moorhead State, and if one gets a special program, then another one has to have it, then another one's, and when you're doing these and you're having this proliferation, you're creating more overhead, you're creating more cost. One thing with the state university system, or MnSCU, that we should be doing is some of the universities should specialize in certain areas. That means that we will only have to pay for a certain piece of equipment once or a certain lab once and get the kids in there that belong in that type of a program. One thing I will guarantee you is I will not support 2 years worth of free university for students in Minnesota. Now, before you think that anybody up here is going to say that, is going to support that, I can guarantee you none of them will, but the Democrats will. And guess what? If we have free tuition for 2 years, you will see nothing but a flood of kids come to this university and all the universities, including the U of M system, that don't belong there. And I absolutely agree with Commissioner Johnson. Some kids aren't prepared for this type of educational background. My daughter goes to Minneapolis Technical and Community College for web design. She's not prepared for that, or she's not prepared for a 4-year university. She's ready for a technical college. Maybe she will go to a 4-year eventually. But we have to not treat our kids as failures if they don't come to this 4-year university or the other ones around the state of Minnesota. We demonize them when we look down upon them. That's not true. The other thing is we have to look at partnering with trade unions and helping kids get into programs that don't even want to go to those types of educational settings, getting them into becoming welders, sheetrock layers. We have a desperate need for people to get into trade unions, and eventually, yeah, will they work very hard? Yes, they'll work hard as a welder. They'll work very hard for a few years, and eventually they move up the scale where they'll start making $30, $40 an hour within a few years. It doesn't take long. So let's find the right educational experience, but let's not demonize kids for not choosing to come to a great university like this.
So much to talk about. Point of clarification, MinSCU members or all at colleges?
All colleges.
All colleges, okay. So we should absolutely not be funding any college, the majority of the funding coming from tax dollars. It's just simply unacceptable. The majority of the majority of the budget needs to come from the students and the industries interested in the children attending, and not just children, adults, people of all ages. It needs to be coming from the practitioner, from the student, from the industries that need the people. It should not be the state of Minnesota. A couple of anecdotes real quick, and you're going to have to tell me 90 minutes because I'm an educator. I taught school for 13 years, became a principal and director of education. Education's my passion. But the bottom line is we're upside down and broken. I want you to think for a second. Although you think it's off topic for a second, think for a second. What industry do you know of where the majority of the managers or leaders in the industry sit back in the office and do just office work, and only a third of the employees are actually on the floor doing the factory work? What industry do you know that can survive like that? Why in the world do we have the number of adults involved in education that never touch a student's life of any age, sitting back in the background, and we have one teacher in a classroom of 20, 30, 100, 150, some universities, 500 students in an auditorium? What industry would survive with that kind of ratio of actual productive work? Does it make sense to anybody? It doesn't to me. So no, the state of Minnesota shouldn't be the primary funding of any institution in a higher education.
Thank you, candidates. I think we want to stay in the realm of education with our second question. The current governor of Minnesota has made it one of his key goals is improving early childhood education, specifically pre-kindergarten. How do you feel about early childhood education and the current programs that we do have? And Marshall specifically has received some of these dollars from the state, so how would that affect them moving forward?
I always go back with almost any question that's asked about giving taxpayers more choices about how their money is spent. And here's a perfect example of that. I don't support the governor's proposal because his proposal essentially says we're going to take away any choice that we're going to give to people with respect to how that money is being spent, and we're going to send it to the public school and say here is where we're going to create this new pre-K or early childhood development. And that's not the answer. If we want to spend money on this, if we feel this is important, and I think that there is some value to it, then let us give the money to the parents and let them choose it and use it in the places where they think best fits their kids' needs. It might be at the school. It might be at the local public school. It might be at a private provider. It might be at an in-home child care center that has an educational component to it. But this thought that government should be taking tax dollars and then giving it back to communities with all these strings attached and giving no choice to taxpayers is really the wrong way to go.
Well, let's call this spade a spade here. The pre-K program that the governor of this state implemented, not with my vote, was a full employment act for the teachers union of the state of Minnesota. That's what it was. Let's call a spade a spade. This is nothing to do with having kids in early childhood. This is educational employment for the teachers union. That's one thing. Two, we have plenty, and of course I talk more about being around in the metro area, the 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds that are in current daycare situations are literally the breath and the life of current daycare union or daycare programs, because you're able to, the ratios are so much more significant that they can actually make money and be able to have infants who need a very low ratio. So when you take out 3- and 4-year-olds from daycares, you are literally destroying daycare centers around the entire state because you're taking away their funding mechanism. My answer, very simple. Instead of having strings attached and all of these other conditions, just send it back to your school districts. Your school districts are smart. Your school districts are also elected. Why is that important? Because when they're elected, you can get rid of them. If they take a direction you don't like, if you want to have early childhood and you want to have these programs, then you go to your school district meetings and you say, this is what I want. You're getting the money from the state, and this is what I want. But you know what? A lot of school districts are going to say, we're going to invest in a different direction. And maybe that's the direction you go. Let you have the choice, because you can always get rid of your school district super people a whole lot faster. You can get rid of the legislature. There's 201 of us, and you only get to vote for a senator and a rep and a governor. But there's 201 plus a governor down there. Let the school district decide the right way. That's the best way. Give you the freedom.
You know, I'm a parent of, we still have 2 in the home. I'm an educator of 26 years, teacher and principal. It would be wonderful to talk about programs that really help children and are genuinely helping children. And I love the notion of helping children and families. But the notion that has been sold to us in the public is simply disingenuous. They have no real interest in helping children or families, especially traditional families. Their interest is indoctrination. I'm going to be that bold, and I'm going to be that accusational. It's literally indoctrination. Indoctrination into a level of thinking and globalism that is simply unacceptable and inappropriate. We're not even concerned about our own backyard anymore. We're not even concerned about our own families and our own communities anymore. We have a minority of people running an industry that's got a chokehold on our parents that it's insulting and inappropriate. And we have to do a better job of talking about this in the public. I know it's a hard subject. I know some people don't want to touch it too much. But we have to, because we have to take on what's really happening with our children in our districts.
Well, I too would not support the governor's universal pre-K program. It is, in fact, as Dave described, just an attempt to take over every facet of raising our kids. You have a governor who has tried to unionize family child care providers. You have a governor who is trying to put out of business every flexible in-home early education child care configuration that exists in churches and in neighborhoods and among family members. You have a governor that is trying to unionize personal care attendants. Every single aspect of raising a child and taking care of family members is being attempted to unionize in this state. The strength of Minnesota's education system, and my dad was a public school teacher, was independent school districts. ISDs, right? We're still an ISD, but we're not. 70 to 80% of the funding for any school district in this state comes from the state. And the state is telling everybody what to do and how to turn around and what formulas drive all of this, and they're rewarding failure. And they aren't rewarding success. You go into Minneapolis and St. Paul, and you literally have schools that are failing 50% of their kids. 50% of the kids in those schools will not graduate. And if you're a minority, it's 75% of the kids. That is an absolute outrage, and under the old independent school districts, it never would happen. But under this bureaucratic education establishment system, it's happening right now. And oh, guess what the governor's solution is? Let's put a kid when they're 3 or 4 years old into one of those failing schools. That will be the solution. No way. We have to have a zero tolerance for failure in our school system. We cannot be pouring more money after bad and assuming that the state knows best. Trust your local school districts. Trust the parents of those kids with vouchers and the like to get them out of failing schools. And for whatever you do, don't start them early into a failing system.
Thank you. We've received a number of questions from you. If you have some more, please hold up your card and somebody will get it up to us, but thank you for what you've sent so far. Our next round of answers will begin with Senator Osmek. Take her away, guys.
This question is from the audience. Roads in rural Minnesota are in decline. The Minnesota pork producers would support a 5-cent gas tax if used for roads and bridges. What is your specific plan for rural roads?
Okay, well, I'm going to talk to the pork producers right now. Pork producers, do you know that in the next 10 years, the Highway User Distribution Fund, which funds our roads, is actually going to increase by 88% higher than inflation? How much more do you think we need? I am not going to sign any increase in gas tax. Why? Because there's 3 components of the Highway User Distribution Fund. One is gas taxes. What are the other 2? Tab fees, which are based on the value of your vehicles, which continues to go up every year. I just bought a new Silverado last year. It was approximately $10,000 more than the last one I bought 5 years ago. Also, sales taxes when you buy that Silverado. So we're having more and more money. We're going to have, in 10 years, almost $750 million. These are numbers that are coming from MnDOT. These aren't numbers that I just pull out. I'm using the same increases, yearly increases that MnDOT is showing on their reports. So if we have $750 million, and we also put in money into out of this legislative session in the budget to have an infusion of $400 million one-time money to infuse to build roads and bridges. My answer is to the pork producers, if we have $750 million more over the next decade, how much more do you think we need? Because every dollar comes out of your pocket. And the thing about the media that they don't talk about is the fact that we have more money every year. Why do we talk about this? Because it's a good, easy, glib way of making Republicans look bad that they don't know what they're talking about. Guess what? We do. We have more money. We can do it with what we have and prioritize what we have right now with the money we have.
So Senator Osmek's on to an absolutely wonderful notion here that we all have to start talking about with our family and friends. Where is the money going? The money that was already there. All the taxation schemes. And just like I'm going to back up to the education thing by the minute, 60% of the schools, 50% of the schools, I'm still paying, I'm 52 years old, I'm paying $20,000 I still have on my student loan. The amount of money I spent in school, and then you're telling me that 60% of the budget was already paid for by the state of Minnesota? Boy, I'm telling you, where's the money going? The same is true for the roads. Where in the world is the money going? The Pork Producers and the Corn Growers Association and several other associations do have a proposal for gas tax. Okay, fine, do the gas tax, but make sure you take away the other schemes. And notice how closely the word scheme is really related to the word scam. Where the heck is all the money going? That's what you got to start asking questions about. Where is all that money going?
I too would not support a gas tax increase and never have. One of the absolute failures of leadership in St. Paul is the fact that our state general fund budget has literally grown 50% in the last 10 years, And all the politicians in St. Paul are jumping up and down saying, we don't have any money for roads. How is that possible? Well, it's partly what Senator Osmek talked about. We have the highway fund, and we have the general fund, and we have all these segregated funds, and guess what? They don't compete against each other as priorities. So I think the legislature made a nice move in the last session to require some general fund allocations to roads and bridges so that roads and bridges are on a level playing field with health and human services, with education, with all the other spending that goes on down there that has driven this 50% increase in our state budget. There is absolutely no way that we don't have enough money in state government right now. A 50% increase, people think about that in 10 years, and they're saying we don't have enough money for one of the fundamental priorities of government, which is to maintain our transportation infrastructure. We can do better, but only with a governor who's willing to stand up and lead.
One of the biggest problems we have in Minnesota is that we take too much money from people. And not just rich people. I think we take too much money from rich people. I think we take too much money from everybody, and in particular from people in the middle class, which are the people that a gas tax is going to hit by far the hard. Gas tax increase is going to hit by far the hardest. And I could go down the list. We're in the top 5 or 6 or maybe 8 in about 10 different tax categories, whether it's the income tax or the corporate tax or the beer tax or the wine tax or the estate tax, sales tax, and gas tax is also there. I think we're 8th in the country in gas tax. We're not short of money. And when I look as a Hennepin County Commissioner at the amount of money we are diverting from roads in my county to other forms of transportation that most people will never use, that is the biggest problem that we have right now. We should be funding roads and bridges aggressively, not light rail, not zip rail, not streetcars, for God's sake, which is the newest darling of the left. And so part of it is about prioritization and making sure we're funding what people actually want to use and need all across the state, not just in rural Minnesota. And another piece of it is what Keith just mentioned. We should be dedicating at least a portion of our general fund and, I believe, bonding to roads and bridges across the state of Minnesota. I would not support a gas tax increase.
Mr. Parrish, this one begins with you. Staying in the realm of roads and ditches, one hot topic or a hot button issue is specifically in this area right now is mowing and haying restrictions and ditches that Governor Dayton has in place, as long with buffer legislation that he also pushed through. How would you handle these forms of legislation, and what would you do to move forward?
Yeah, first let me make a general statement for the sake of farmers and landowners. For goodness sakes, get off our backs. Leave us alone. People who manage land, if you think for one moment that we're trying to destroy the earth, destroy our communities, destroy our water, you're nuts. You've lost your mind. Who on earth believes that a farmer, a landowner, wants to destroy their land or their water? It's just an absolutely ludicrous notion in the first place. I can't even believe we have the discussion. So then you come along this notion of monitoring and managing grasslands and border strips and all this. Come on, the farmers are doing a great job. Are there people out there that exploit programs and exploit the land? Yes, there are. But guess what? Guess who ends up exposing that? The landowners around them, and they end up helping each other and fix it. You don't need a centralized authority telling you a bunch of shenanigans that doesn't work in the first place. The reason we have the problem in the beginning is because guess why some of those people are exploiting the land and exploiting the programs? Because a mandate was created in the first place. That's why they exploit the land and the land management issues in the first place. And they don't even, most of those people that exploit the land, they don't even live here.
I couldn't agree more. Actually, I have specifically proposed getting rid of the buffer regulation if I'm governor, and similarly the ditch control regulations that are kind of on hold and in suspense right now. This brings up a bigger point, though, and you travel around this state, and people have this sense that government is coming at them, not from them, and that we used to have a really good thing in Minnesota. Our tried and true Minnesota ethic guided us. the way all of us were raised, each of us probably in this room, raised by our parents and our grandparents, that you do the right thing, you tell the truth, you get a good education, you work hard, you take care of your family, you love God and your neighbor, and you give back to your community. That is Minnesota. We can believe in the people of Minnesota again. We can trust Minnesotans, not bigger government, for our future. And if we do, we will reinvigorate not only that Minnesota ethic, but the American dream. People are looking at government right now, and it is just totally inconceivable to them. They do not understand what's going on. It's all broken. They don't trust the political class. We have an opportunity in this election to have a governor step forward and say, we will believe in our people again across this state. Whether you're a family in downtown Minneapolis who just wants a good school, a safe school, whether you're somebody up on the Iron Range who's just looking for the mines to be approved or the pipeline to be approved, somebody out in greater Minnesota who just wants MPCA and DNR off their back, we need a governor who's going to stand strong for the people of Minnesota, fight all of those entrenched special interests, all of those bureaucracies that are holding us back. Our economy is not growing. We have trend lines in the wrong direction. We need a governor who's going to stand strong for the people of this state and against the entrenched special interests and make sure that we get back to that Minnesota ethic and that American dream. We can do it. We can do it, and we will.
So I answered the last question by saying one of the biggest problems in Minnesota is that we take too much money from people. But the biggest problem in Minnesota is this belief amongst people in state government that they know best how we should spend our money and how we should live our lives. And that is the whole reason for me running for this office. That has to change. And the ditch mowing issue is the perfect example of that. I'm guessing most of you understand it, but if you don't, it's for years, farmers have been mowing ditches, sometimes their own, sometimes just public ditches, and then using the grass to feed their livestock. And it's never been a problem until the last year or two, where someone in state government in some agency said, well, we can't let them do that because it might disturb a bee habitat or something like that. And so we're going to tell them that they no longer can do that, or at least they have to buy some sort of license to do that. It's a great example of government agencies' arrogance. The arrogance we're seeing right now from agencies like the DNR or the PCA or the Department of Transportation or the Department of Revenue, and I could go right on down the list, is absolutely outrageous. And that has to change. We have to put people in charge of their own destinies in this state, and I can't think of a better example of that than whether it's ditch mowing or the buffer strip issue. Government doesn't know best, and that has to change.
Well, you know, the biggest problem I have with this whole subject is that we're under the control of King Mark Dayton I. Because name the bill number where we actually legislatively passed the buffer laws. There's legislators in the room. There isn't one. Why? Because he did it by his own rulemaking authority. Number two, let's talk about neonicotinoids. Who passed the law on that one? It wasn't the legislature. That was Imperial Governor Mark Dayton I. And he continues to do that through his administration. We need to, A, reform rulemaking authority to stop this shenanigans. 2, repeal every one of these laws and let the local governments deal with them because, again, St. Paul doesn't know best. Father knows best, but certainly St. Paul doesn't. You know, the reason we get into these problems is because environmental DFLers are ruling the roost in St. Paul. Look at the candidates they're putting in front of you. All but one of them are metrocrats that are more than happy to do anything they can to get in the way of a farmer producing food that they need to eat every day. I'm sorry, that sushi doesn't grow on trees, folks. You need to have farmers bringing food to the market. And it's a prime example of this is what was called the Citizens Board of the PCA. We got rid of them a couple years ago. Why? Because they were stocked with environmentalists. The farmer seat on this Citizens Board was a failed farmer that planted soybeans from China and was shocked that they didn't grow in the Minnesota climate. It was a miserable failure, and I asked her during Senate confirmations, If you had had a failure like this, would you have gone out of business? Well, no, I work for the University of Minnesota. Well, there it is. You've got somebody who has no connection with agriculture sitting on an agriculture seat trying to bring the farmer's viewpoint to the Citizens Board of the PCA. And guess what happened? We got rid of them. Why? Because they're just nothing but cronies for King Mark Dayton I, and I can't wait to get rid of Mark Dayton and put one of us up here in that place and give the power back to the people.
I believe the next question starts with Keith Downey. We had a couple questions from the audience about daycare. One of the questions is, do you have any thought on how to address daycare, the daycare crisis in the state? More specifically, regulation is forcing small independent daycares out of business.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about early childhood education, and it's part of the same symptom of Governor Dayton and the Democrats trying to unionize and regulate every aspect of child rearing. Literally, we had 15,000 in-home family child care providers, I'm going to say 5 years ago. It wasn't too long ago. We're down to 8,000 now. Why? Because their lives have been made miserable by a forced unionization effort, a regulatory regime taking away all flexibility and all ability for people in an in-home child care situation to actually customize their program and meet the needs of their family members or their neighbors in a customized way. So first and foremost, we need to get off the backs of in-home family child care providers and allow them to reemerge and grow. I don't think we know how big a distortion that has placed on the overall child care situation in Minnesota. We also have subsidies for child care that end up kind of distorting a market wherein it actually is more cost beneficial for you to work and send your kids to child care because of the subsidies than to stay home with your children. Those are distortions that we have artificially created in the market through this forced unionization, over-regulation, and then this kind of subsidizing of all these things that we want to do to earn votes. So take care of those three things, and I think you would see the child care market stabilize in Minnesota.
So this goes back to the same theme that I've talked about a couple times, which is government, and particularly government agencies, believing that they know best how we should run our businesses and how we should live our lives. My sister, I grew up in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. She still lives there. She's had an in-home child care in her house for almost 30 years now, 25 to 30 years. So every time I go home, I get quite an earful about how government treats her and her small business. And I was just home for Thanksgiving, so I got two ears full. And I look at what's happening in this industry. These are small business people, mostly small business women, who work on a tiny, tiny margin and who are providing a service that is desperately needed in this state, particularly in greater Minnesota. And government is putting them out of business because it knows best every little thing they should do. Overregulation is a problem in Minnesota, but there are a few places where it is a bigger problem than in child care, especially in-home daycares. And so there is not a difficult answer to this. It's simple. Government needs to back off. It doesn't mean we don't need to regulate. Of course we do. Whether it's environmental regulations or regulations that make sure that our kids are safe. But it's gone completely overboard because of the arrogance of state government. And until we change that culture, and only a governor can do it, this problem and many others are never going to be solved.
Well, the first part of the problem is that we try to unionize them. And hopefully this is going to be changing in the near future, that we should not be, we went down that path in 2013. We went round the clock at the state capitol. All that unionization does in the current environment is create cost increases because you're going to have to kick back some of your money to the union organization, which does what? It reduces your profit and reduces what you can actually keep in your pocket as a daycare provider. That's the truth of the situation. They weren't lending, daycare unionization wasn't lending any marginal or any measurable level of increase in quality or anything. It was just adding to the cost. We've got to stop that. And from a government standpoint, we should also be looking at all of the tiny minutia of little regulations that come out every single year, that you have to give an exact portion of this protein, an exact portion, all of the tiny regulations that go into running a daycare program. We already do have programs that help people that are low income, and I think as Christians that we actually have to help people to change the dynamic and get out of a cycle where if they want to use this and if they need to have some help, we can give them a crutch to help them up, not a perfect support system that is going to be cradle to grave socialism, which is the direction that Imperial Mark Dayton has gone in this state. We've got to go back to a much more free society, but still help them, and we can. We have programs that are doing that. We just need to not be incentivizing more of this union activity.
I want to make sure I don't take any credit where credit's not due, but a shout out to my cousin Jennifer Parrish. Jennifer Parrish is one of the daycare providers that participated in a lawsuit that helped stop the unionization of the child care providers. Jennifer taught me a lot. I learned a lot from her. I learned a lot from her example of standing up, and we had some wonderful attorneys that helped with her. So here's the deal. I'm going to answer the question with a question. How do we allow, as U.S. citizens, as Minnesota citizens, how do we allow this fiasco to continue on? Ask yourself a question. This is a government under I like this whole trend you got started here, Senator Osmek, this imperial dictator. This is a trend we got going on here that while doing all the shenanigans and forcing us into this situation, what has actually happened? One, it created a crisis, a premeditated crisis, to help provide what? Help provide ammunition for the early childhood initiative. The other thing going on that you have to ask yourself a question is, do you remember the article that finally got exposed here about, maybe 18 months ago now, the Kingdom Care in the Twin Cities area? That was a complete front company, wasn't having any children serviced at all, and all that money was being laundered to extremist groups. 8 years of an imperial dictator enforcing and implementing rules and mandates, and what result do you get? You get daycare providers that are complete front companies and shell companies funneling money to extremist groups and exploiting your state and federal tax dollars. Does that make much sense to you? Is that enough of an example for you to stand on the Capitol steps and start knocking on doors and asking, what in the world are you up to? That's what we need to start doing, and that's what I intend to do.
Thank you, candidates. The next question, I have 2 cards here I will read from. They're questions from the audience. Provide some commentary about universal health care for all. What are your thoughts about helping children and families? The second one reads, healthcare is too expensive, insurance premiums are too high. What would you do to fix the healthcare mess created by Obamacare? Jeff Johnson, I believe this one begins with you.
So, excuse me, so I just put a video out today, it's on Facebook and on our website, explaining single-payer healthcare, because I believe every DFL candidate for governor has embraced that idea. And I relish that debate during the election, because it's exactly the opposite direction we need to go. It is complete and total control by government. Private insurance disappears. Everybody is on the same government plan, and government bureaucrats are making all decisions about our health care. The answer to this is to move in exactly the opposite direction, to give people more control, to give people more choices, and that means actually rolling back the mandates instead of creating new ones, actually trying to create more competition out in the market so people, especially in greater Minnesota, have more than 1 or 2 choices. If you have 8 or 10 choices, you're probably going to have lower prices and higher quality. But all of a sudden, the direction we seem to want to go is to say, well, the ACA, Obamacare, didn't do enough to destroy health care and health insurance in the state of Minnesota and across the country. Let's take it the next step further and have complete government control. My answer to that is we are always in Minnesota going to take care of people who need help. That's just who we are. So we're not going to abandon people and throw them out on the street. But the answer is not more government control. It is more individual choice, it is fewer mandates, and it is more options for people.
Well, let's start off with making sure that you understand that this idea of Medicare for all is a steaming pile of cow dung. It's actually not that. It's a Trojan horse filled with cow dung. Because what Medicare for all does is it tricks you into believing you got insurance. because it has everything to do with Medicare reimbursement rates. What you need to understand about people who are on Medicare, and there's some in the room, that you are actually only getting reimbursed to your doctor. When you go for a doctor's office visit, let's say that the cost is actually $200. The doctor is only seeing about $40 back from Medicare. That's because the reimbursement rate for an office visit is, in many cases, between 20% and 30% of what the actual costs are. Now, doctors are small businessmen at heart. They don't do this out of the charity of their own heart. They have to be able to pay for the lights, pay for the equipment, pay for the nurse that comes in, pay for the labs that they're going to do. If you're getting reimbursed, how long do you think you can stay in business being reimbursed at your cost minus 20 or 30 or 50 or 80%? Not very long. So what they're trying to sell you, Bernie Sanders and all of his aides, which incidentally is a guy named Tim Walz, he's buying into this. He wants to bring the same pain and misery of a Trojan horse filled with cow dung to your insurance. And I'll finish with this one. When's the last time you went to deal with your license tabs and your licenses? Guess what? MNLARS is a failure. Why is it a failure? We had a Senate transportation hearing. We pulled up all those people who, incidentally, the guy that's responsible for that disaster is now taking a vacation because he can't handle the pressure of the legislature actually hold him accountable for the steaming disaster that MNLARS is. And if you don't think that's a steaming failure, how well do you think MNsure has worked? MNsure is a disaster upon a disaster that still can't work. And it's falling apart. We did in this legislative session a couple things. One, we stabilized the individual insurance market, because if we did nothing, because our friends at the federal government unfortunately choked on the legislation that would have done something this year, if we did nothing, we would have had the whole individual insurance market completely fail in this state. Two, we allowed for-profit insurance companies to come into Minnesota to try and create a change in the marketplace, because private insurance and the private marketplace will always bring you a lower cost, better result. It's proven through history, and it can be proven again in Minnesota.
Wow, 90 seconds. There's so much to cover. Let's start with the fact that you have a situation where you've been lied to, and propaganda is so deep, and the layers of propaganda on top of propaganda to make sure you're distracted enough to not know or be distracted from the truth that you were lied to is just causing us all heartache. The bottom line, Minnesotans, we're compassionate, decent, loving people. Nobody wants anybody in a bad situation. If there's a few people that do, they're a very tiny, tiny bunch. I've been out there talking full-time to people since the 14th of April, and I'm telling you, 99% of the population, they want nothing but good for all of us. But what we've got is a situation where we have what I call payers and planners and non-payers and non-planners. Okay, and there's no lie about this. There's no secret about this. The payers and planners are making up the difference for the non-payers and non-planners. Now let's just ignore the fact that we have catastrophic health concerns that no one can control and no one can plan for. We got all that. But the bottom line is you've got a pool of people trying to make up for all the costs. So you have people who can't plan or pay because they don't know what it's going to cost. You have clinics and doctors that can't plan or pay because they don't know if they're going to get paid. And then on top of it, now you added a bureaucracy, a level of bureaucracies that is exploiting the people to the tunes of millions of dollars, probably in the billions now in Minnesota alone, to add on top of that paying, or that pool that we have to try and pay for. Could you imagine what would happen if the payers and planners actually could plan for what we need to pay for? Do you know how many non-planners and non-payers might become payers and planners if they had a predictable expense? Do you know how many doctors and clinics and hospitals would actually come up with a list of this is how much it costs if they knew that they could get paid? You see where I'm going with this? All of you, I can see the heads nodding. You're all intelligent people. Why are we letting these people lie to us and manipulate us and exploit us over and over and over again? I would love to talk more. I know I'm out of time, so thank you.
Well, Republicans have been great at describing this and talking about it and doing absolutely nothing. We've known this problem for 6 years. The Obamacare MNsure death spiral. We're seeing it right here in Minnesota. Costs going through the roof, coverages being limited, access to physicians being limited, and we've done nothing as Republicans. I'm the only candidate up here who has actually proposed a concrete solution to fix this problem with the will to go into St. Paul and actually make it happen. Our St. Paul legislature just spent $542 million, that's a $500 million, to guarantee, to bail out the insurance companies, to guarantee that MNsure is going to survive another 2 years. Totally suspend the death spiral, give it a new lease on life. Oh, we want to kill MNsure, we want to bury MNsure. That's what the candidates say, right? What did we do? Well, I guess we had to save MNsure before we could kill it and bury it. No, we need to be done with this debacle. My proposal takes the nearly 1 million, yes, you heard that right, nearly 1 million people in Minnesota who are on state-administered insurance programs through medical assistance, Minnesota Care, and the MNsure subsidy, and it provides them a voucher so that they can go out into the private market and buy an insurance coverage that has the coverage they want, all of the benefits that are right for them and their family at a price that is priced for them. We had this proposal. It was called Healthy Minnesota back in 2008, 2009, before Obamacare took over. I was in the legislature. We were piloting it. I've named my plan the Healthy Minnesota Plan. We can give every single person who is currently on a state-run insurance coverage a voucher to go out and buy insurance in the private sector, and it will dramatically reduce costs. Dramatically reduce costs. My plan says that we will do that. We will cut costs 25 to 50% in state government. We will maintain Minnesota's historically low uninsured rate, and we will give people the freedom to go out and buy the coverage that they need, the benefits that they want that are right for their family at a price that is set for them. We can do this. We just have to have the political will to fight the battles at the federal and the state level, and so far Republicans have not had the political will, and here we sit 6 years later without a single stinking proposal that's advanced to the legislature to force the governor or the president to actually veto it. With a Republican governor, we can get this done. I will do it.
So I guess we start with Dave Osmek next. And this is another question from the audience. As far as education goes, the schools going to the STEM system, is there a plan for physical education? And do you believe that kids are getting enough physical activity?
You know what? That's not a question for the legislature. That's a question for your school district. And if you think that they're not getting enough physical education, then you should go to your school board meeting and ask that question. It shouldn't be done by 201 legislators because we don't know it all. This is a prime example of great question. Don't ask the legislature because you don't want us answering that question.
I'm still a licensed principal, and since I've been back from my last set of active duty orders, I've been spending a lot of time substitute teaching. I can tell you that throughout southern Minnesota for sure, and I can expand on that because of some friends up north in the Twin Cities area. There are some districts that are doing a wonderful job with making sure that the programs they're offering are well organized and well funded and well staffed. There are other districts, sadly I report to you, that are not doing well at all and have no care or regard at all for physical education, in my view, in my personal view. Senator Osmek is mentioning something that is very true, and we need to get back to. You as parents, you as district members, school board members, if you don't like what's going on, you need to get in there and start saying something. And I'm telling you what, as a substitute teacher in the last several months, there's some concerns in our classrooms that you all need to get in there and start looking at.
Exactly right. This is a matter for parents and families first, and if they wish to weigh in on their local school boards and increase what's going on in their schools, they could be free to do it. Absolutely. But this is, again, just a symptom of this problem that we do not have independent school districts in Minnesota anymore. Every time anybody wants to do something, they run down to the state and ask them to change the funding formula, right? And so the funding formula is this Byzantine web maze of funding rules that nobody knows how to navigate except for a couple of analysts in the legislature and the Department of Education. We have got to unwind those things as compared to adding more to that formula and asking the state legislature and the governor to carry our water. Parents and local school districts just need to do their jobs.
I don't know that there's a lot to add to that other than it does go back to the same issue that I keep going back to, which is that the state seems to believe that it always has the best answers. And we should be eliminating mandates on our school districts rather than adding new ones. I believe we have over 100 state mandates on our school districts. Every school board member that I talk to says, you know, I don't really feel like I have a great control over what's happening in my schools because we are essentially given money and a string is attached to almost every dollar we get. And then throw on top of that the fact that we're told this, you have to do this, that, and the other thing. We shouldn't be doing that. And as governor, one of my priorities will be to start rolling back mandates on our school boards and regulations on our small businesses. So the same as what these guys have said, this is not a question for the state. I have an opinion about it, but that's an opinion for me as a parent to deal with my own school board on.
This one will go to Mr. Parrish. This is a question from the audience. We are seeing more and more windmills taking up our farmland. It is inefficient and subsidized by the government. How do you feel about using our prime farmland for this?
Yeah, the key word you said there is subsidized. Here's the problem with all of our initiatives and programs and that I call them the good fairy idea people. You know, they come into the room and they throw you this little good fairy idea, and then they disappear while you're mandated to implement it, and then they're never around when it all goes wrong. You have a situation without subsidy, is it viable? And it doesn't matter if it's wind or other programs or ideas that come to my desk, or when I'm governor, if it comes to my desk, is it viable without subsidy? If it's viable with subsidy, to what extent? When does that subsidy end? Those are the kinds of questions that good people should be asking. And legislators need the support of a good leader to defend and push back when the answer is, no, it's not viable without a subsidy. Well, if it's not viable without a subsidy, then how does it make sense in the first place? Could you and I start a business like that? We couldn't. And so over and over again, I could beat this, I could beat this dead horse to death over and over and over again, because you've seen the results of it over the last previous federal administration, and it's just carried on with the same issues over and over and over again. When are we going to stop? When are we going to push back and say enough of this? If it's viable with subsidies, tell the truth about it. If it's not viable, then make sure that people understand it's not viable and stop going down that road.
I couldn't agree more. I think where subsidies exist, and I would attempt to unwind them, some respect for private property and the enforceability of contracts requires that we do it in a gradual fashion so that people who have entered into business and contractual relationships and other basic income dependency have a chance to unwind from the subsidies without being crushed in one fell swoop. We actually did that with a portion of the ethanol subsidy. I think it was back in 2013. It eventually wound down, and now many of those businesses have to stand on their own 2 feet. Some of the tax credits for the construction are still there. So anyway, not a fan of subsidies. Unwind them in a practical way. But this just gets at what's happening in Minnesota more globally. Minnesota used to have some of the cheapest electricity in the country. It was one of the competitive advantages that we had. Decent low-cost health care, high quality, low cost of energy, talented workforce. We had all of these native advantages. And guess what? As state government started taking over and the federal government started taking over, we no longer were competing as a state against other states. We were being kind of normalized with everybody else. Here we sit today, and I don't know if anybody noticed, but our quarter-over-quarter GDP growth for this last quarter was 1.2%. That was one of the lowest in the country. The quarter-to-quarter growth before that was a 0.3% contraction. Over the last 6 months, Minnesota's economy on an annualized basis has only grown 0.9%. That's about a third or a fourth of what's happening in the rest of this country, and it's because we have embarked on all of these schemes where we are trying to control the market. We're trying to enforce some kind of philosophical belief that we have, and what we're doing is undermining our ability to succeed as a state. We need to get back to trusting in our people, believing in our people, reinvigorating that Minnesota ethic, and reinvigorating the American dream here. If we do that, Minnesota will do great, but we got to get out all this stuff in order to equip our people to do it.
This question does go to a bigger issue about government picking winners and losers in the private market. And we do it all the time in state government, and we shouldn't be. And there is probably no better example than in the area of energy, whether you're talking about wind energy or other forms of energy. When we subsidize, when we pick one part of the private economy and say we want this part to succeed, so we're going to give it a benefit that the other parts don't get, whether it's a subsidy or a tax break, that usually doesn't end up well. And we've seen it, as Keith mentioned, we used to have some of the lowest energy costs in the country. We don't anymore. It's not even close, and it's only going to get worse because of some of the decisions that have been made by politicians. And I will talk to some of my friends who support subsidies in this area, and they will admit that there is a cost. There's a real cost to real normal people because their bills are going up. They'll admit that. So I'll say, so what is it then? Can you tell me what the actual benefit of this is? Can you show me how you've measured that this has somehow changed the world or changed the earth or changed Minnesota? And the answer is, well, no, we can't really measure that, but it's the right thing to do. But there's no way to measure that. And I just have to tell you, I am tired of the era where real people are being hurt because it makes politicians feel better. And this is just one of many examples of that.
Well, as the chair of actually the Senate Senate Energy and Utilities Committee, I'm deeply involved in what we're talking about here. I am very happy to tell you we actually started ramping down subsidies on solar in Minnesota. We had a program called Made in Minnesota. It was a SOP for an Iron Range contingency back in 2013 that incentivized residential solar under the most expensive level possible. So if we have a limited finite amount of money that was coming from who? Ratepayers. Who are ratepayers? Raise your hand, everybody in the audience, you are a ratepayer. So it was taking money out of your pocket, incentivizing the most expensive solar in the entire world just because it was quote-unquote made in Minnesota. And that was only to help out two different companies, primarily one on the Iron Range, which is failing right now. Funny how everything seems to go to the Iron Range and fail. But, you know, we were incentivizing this to the tune of millions of dollars of your ratepayer dollars. Well, I'm proud to tell you we ended that program effective the end of this year. We are slowly ramping down out of that to going into a new program called Solar Rewards that Excel Energy actually is involved in dealing with. But it's going to not just incentivize the most expensive solar, but incentivize if you're going to do any kind of solar that you're going to do it efficiently. And isn't that what the government's supposed to do, is make the most efficient movement on your money? Now, when you talk about wind energy now is almost on par and sometimes a little bit less than current conventional carbon-based outputs, whether that's coal, natural gas, or others. We are, because of the federal mandates are now decreasing, and I believe they're exiting the market next year, they're going to stand on their own. And any new wind that's going up is going to be standing all by itself and has to support itself because there won't be any subsidies for them. One thing that I have come to see more is this wind energy possibility, because one thing that helps farmers in a bad time is having these payments come from having a turbine or two on their property. But these turbines have to be put in a place where they're not obstructive, where they're not intrusive on their neighbors. But at $10,000 per turbine, that can help farmers get through a bad period of time when markets aren't very good. So I've come to see the light on wind energy, that it can fit in the mix, but we have to have that as part of our entire portfolio, including nuclear energy, because our nuclear fleet is going to be decertifying in 2032, and they don't grow on trees. We have to find a way to create that energy, cheap energy, because it is driving businesses out of Minnesota. And afterwards, I could tell you about a business that is cutting half of its workforce because of the cost of energy in Minnesota. It is very real, and we have to deal with this and create a lower cost energy grid for all of us.
The next question starts with Mr. Downey. What will you do as governor to improve Highway 14, 23, and 212 so they better connect southwest Minnesota with the major population centers of the state?
I'm glad you asked that question. We haven't talked a lot about the state budget and the business climate here, but one of my proposals in order to prioritize the things that are most important for us and to reinvigorate our private economy is a commitment to reduce state spending by 15% in my first term. And if we do that, that is a $7 billion per biennium savings from the state that we can apply to a substantial amount of tax relief. We could get rid of the statewide business property tax. We could get rid of the estate tax. We could get rid of the corporate tax. We could provide pass-through S-corp tax relief. We could provide across-the-board income tax relief. And we could get rid of the $2 billion tax increase that the Democrats passed 6 years ago and still have enough money for my infrastructure initiative. I have proposed that we would put a boost into road and bridge infrastructure, water and wastewater, and broadband, and the savings that come from that budget cutting exercise that I just talked about would allow us to identify a concrete list of projects that we are going to prioritize, including likely the ones that were just mentioned, so that everybody in Minnesota knows that these savings that we are choosing to redeploy for road and bridge, water and wastewater, and broadband infrastructure, they know exactly where it's going. The money doesn't go behind the curtain at DOT and come out someplace that we had no idea it would come out at. We're going to get at these projects. We're going to give the people of Minnesota confidence that we're going to get at those key projects that are critical from a safety and a congestion and people and product moving standpoint.
This one is pretty simple for me, because what I have said I'm going to instruct my Department of Transportation Commissioner to do is to come up with a plan that funds roads and bridges, not streetcars, not light rail, but funds roads and bridges based on two things: congestion relief in the areas that need congestion relief, and connecting our population centers throughout the rest of the state. I suspect that the examples you gave would probably fit the second part of that, but what we just do not prioritize anymore, or at least we don't prioritize on any objective measure. Instead, it's all based upon the politics of the day and who can get what for their constituents. And instead, we have to say, here are the two things that matter the most. We need to relieve congestion, which, by the way, MnDOT has all but stopped spending money on congestion relief. And we need to make sure that every part of our state is connected to every other part of our state. Pretty straightforward for me.
Well, I'm probably the only one up here who actually voted in the last legislative session to do Highway 14, Highway 212, Highway 12. And those impact all of you. We are investing in those in this legislative budget, and I'm proud that we did it. And we had to fight like the dickens to keep that in the bill. Why? Because people were calling it an earmark. Well, that's an earmark. That's an evil earmark. No, it's not. It's the legislature telling the Minnesota Department of Transportation where we want them to spend money. Aren't we responsible for that? Now, the second part of this is, are we going to have a Minnesota Department of Transportation that is transparent? We had hearings on this. We have to have additional transparency with Senator Newman's help, who's the chair of transportation. We have held MnDOT accountable and are demanding that they change their procedures so we know How is their selection process? How is it that we suddenly decide to build a road over here on the Iron Range? Sorry to pick on them again, but we put a 4-lane highway on the Iron Range where there's 2 people that drive on it every hour. Meanwhile, on Highway 23, it's nothing but bumper to bumper all day long. How do you determine, and how do you determine where we're going to spend the money? We want transparency in where your money goes. My Commissioner of Transportation will do just that. So there's many different angles that you can take on that, but believe me, we've done the work to try to change this. We also have to do one thing, and Commissioner Johnson talked about it briefly. We have got to end the silliness of light rail transportation in the metropolitan area. It is a boondoggle upon a boondoggle upon a boondoggle. The next line, Southwest, is $2 billion. Guess what? Half of that comes from you. And if you think we could just give away $2 billion for a 14 or 17-mile line that is already served by buses, we're going to be taking that money away from you, and the rest of Minnesotans will pay for this silliness that we don't need.
What am I going to do? I'm going to personally get involved with negotiating with the people involved in those specific plans and areas. We have a lot of things, a lot of layers to look out for. The governor needs to personally get involved with some eminent domain issues and protecting private property owners. The governor needs to personally get involved with exposing those who are, again, is another example of the government picking winners and losers. Picking winners and losers of which city is going to have more ability to access, more ability to develop infrastructure and expand their community. The government shouldn't be involved, the transportation shouldn't be involved with picking winners and losers of which city is going to get the new plant by socially engineering the infrastructure to benefit one community over another. So as governor, I'm going to personally get involved with negotiating with the players involved, including protecting the private property owner.
This one will begin with Jeff Johnson. Local government aid is important to hold down property taxes in all cities in southwest Minnesota. Do you see proposing a cut to the local government aid program as a governor?
I don't know if yeah, actually I probably would cut it, but most importantly, I'd change the formula, because that's the problem. It's not how much we spend, it's how it's dispersed and who it's sent to. My understanding when I was in the legislature was that the whole purpose of local government aid when it first started was to help especially smaller communities in greater Minnesota that didn't have the tax base to, through their property taxes, provide basic services like fire and police and build local roads. And so the state decided that maybe we ought to help out those communities that need that help through local government aid. I'm good with that. I think that makes sense. The problem is the formula over the years has changed, and it is benefiting cities that don't have a problem with a property tax base. Minneapolis and St. Paul being chief among them. Minneapolis and St. Paul spend a lot of money, and they spend a lot of money on some really stupid things. And we are sending them boatloads of local government aid. And so the answer to this is not necessarily how much we spend on it. It is what does the formula look like? Let us go back to the original intent of providing the money to the smaller communities that actually need the help. And I think that solves the problem.
Well, when you spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on water fountains in Minneapolis, per water fountain, you know that the system is corrupt. Every time we get more local government aid, guess where about 25 to 30% of it goes? Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth. That isn't what this program was designed. When the Minnesota, quote-unquote, Minnesota Miracle happened, it was to help communities that couldn't help for themselves. It was because Minnesota is primarily a Christian state that believes in helping its neighbor. I don't disagree with local government aid. I absolutely agree that the formula is so screwed up right now that we can't possibly undo it without blowing the whole thing up and starting all over from scratch and making a determination on where do we spend this money. Does Minneapolis really need it? Do they really need to redo Nicollet Mall again? How many times has that failed? We keep investing in failure upon failure in Minneapolis. Garbage burners. I mean, look at some of the silliness that garbage burners are a great example. They built this thing. Now they're coming to the legislature begging and pleading for us to put special legislation in to make it economically viable. That's because Minneapolis and St. Paul are run by a bunch of environmentalists who don't get outside of the 494, 694 corridor. That's the fact. And the bottom line here is local government aid should be used as a helper for cities, and I don't disagree with keeping it. It just has to be blown up and changed and start over from scratch so that we're not subsidizing poor behavior in the metropolitan area.
Well, here again, I think you're going to hear a lot of the same responses over and over and over again. The bottom line is we have to get involved with exposing what's really happening, the truth on the ground. The propaganda that you're hearing in the media, the propaganda you're hearing from specific entities in our communities versus the truth on the ground. And the truth on the ground is the local government aid is being exploited by specific communities. And the communities that are actually need it aren't getting what they need. So this is a repeat of the same example and the same principles you're hearing over again tonight. And this happens to be one of them, where you're being exploited and manipulated through propaganda. And then in the end, there's no due process and there's no representation. It is literally taxation without representation, to take your money and do stuff with it that you were never informed of or ever had a chance to vote on or approve. Because not even your legislators that you voted for are actually having the opportunity to push back. So it's taxation without representation, and there's no due process. The money's going where you never had a chance to ever direct it in the first place.
Yeah, we need to reduce local government aid statewide, but to do it intelligently so that the communities that need it aren't the ones who are hurt. I actually had a proposal, a local government aid reform proposal, when I was in the legislature that would substantially reduce the budget, and it would change the formula in order to do that so that it was not based on inputs and head counts and other kind of input metrics, but that it would be based on outcomes and what the local communities were choosing to do with it. A portion of local government aid would be transferred over into grants, and communities that joined together on specific projects would have a preference in the grant allocation process. So we can dramatically reduce the local government aid budget and do a far better job of serving those communities that actually need it, and ask them to be a little smarter with what they do with it. A final editorial comment on this. We have a huge problem in Minnesota in terms of the way politicians have exploited the greater Minnesota metro divide. They've created it. We're one state. The people of the state are great people all over, but the politicians have gamed this system, and nowhere more so did they do that when the Democrats had complete control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's office 6 years ago. And all the people in local governments out there, they know that they got jammed in greater Minnesota. And the education funding formula, the local government aid formula, the bonding bill, the transportation funding, everything went to the metro. The metro mayors jumped up and down about how they were holding property taxes down. And you know who paid for it? The people in greater Minnesota. They created this divide artificially for political purposes. And I hate to say it, but Republicans have regained majorities in our House and our Senate in part by exploiting it back and educating people on what actually happened. This election, this new governor, this new legislature needs to turn a page on that. We need to do things fairly. We can't pit people against each other. We got to find a way to come together as a state, and it isn't by sprinkling tons of LGA and bonding money all over the place. No, it's by having a rational discussion about how we prioritize, how we cut costs, and how we start believing in our people again, how we get government to quit crowding out the private sector, how we create an abundance mentality, not a scarcity mentality that pits people against each other, that we focus on growth and opportunity in this state. We do that, and all these scarcity questions, all this pitting of people against each other, it comes to an end. Why? Because we're growing everywhere around this state, and it is absolutely good for everyone, and we can do it.
Candidates, thank you for your answers to this wide variety of questions. We'll be moving to your 2-minute closing statements, though first I wanted to acknowledge SMSU President Connie Gores, who is with us this evening. Madam President, thank you for joining us. We'll begin the 2-minute closing statements in reverse order of the answers to the first question. So that means we'll begin with Mr. Parrish and then work our way northward up the table. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight in a wonderful institution that should be filled with opportunities to help people actually grow and get involved. And this is a perfect example of what we need more of. We need more opportunity to get involved with our local, our state, and our federal government inside our universities and in our high schools. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be wonderful if we actually talked about U.S. government, U.S. rule of law, the state of Minnesota, the state constitution in our schools? That would be an amazing thing. I'm Phillip Parrish. Please get to the website. There's not enough time in 2 minutes to really get to everything we need to talk about. Parrish for MN.com. P-A-R-R-I-S-H, the number 4, MN.com. Please get to the website. Please connect with the social media, Twitter, Facebook, Google+. Get out there, connect with it. Get involved with the information. Spread the information. If you don't like something, tell us you don't like it. The cornerstones of our campaign is freedom, security, and prosperity. I will protect your freedoms. On day one, I will take every legal action possible to remove as many mandates and overregulation and overreach that I possibly can. I will immediately start working with and negotiating with legislators from both parties to assure that your freedoms are protected. Security, I will make sure that we actually follow state and federal law. We will end our participation in the immigration relocation program, and we can do it. It's not just something that we have to accept and take it bending over, saying that it's just that's the way it's going to be, and nobody can do nothing about it. We can do something about it. We're going to make sure that your prosperity is a priority. Your individual prosperity is the best way to help our communities and help our nation. And if you're really interested in helping people abroad, do it through making sure you prosper in your backyard and your community is taken care of first. It's a simple principle in life. I can't help my children if I'm incapacitated or can't help them because I physically or monetarily can't help them. It's not possible, correct? The same is true for our U.S. government and our state government especially. And our governor, when I'm in office, I will assure that you have a chance to prosper and you aren't shamed for it or guilted for it, and that you're trusted to do good things with your prosperity and affect your community the way you see fit. Because if there's one notion that we all have to start fighting about and pushing back on, is this notion that a centralized authority can do it better than you can as a citizen. It's simply wrong, it's inappropriate, it's unacceptable, it's unconscionable, and it's not part of our state or federal constitution.
David Osmek.
Well, thanks for having us here tonight. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself. We didn't have an intro. I actually was born in Glencoe, a little bit east of here. Came home to my parents' family farm that we've had in the family for almost 150 years now, outside of a little town called Biskie. That's between Hutchinson and Glencoe. That's 100 people in a liquor store, which is really ultimately small town of Minnesota. And we had farm animals, and I lived there for the first 18 years of my life. So I'm very familiar with the agriculture community. I was loaned out to the neighboring farmers to bale out second crop alfalfa, as well as clean out the farrow crates for pigs and the cow barns. So I know a lot about manure, and believe me, the governor of Minnesota has a lot of manure in the governor's mansion, and it's time to clean it out. So what do I want to do when I get to St. Paul? I want to bring a fighter mentality that brings the fighter to the legislature and says, this is what we believe in. We believe in community. We believe in helping out people who need a helping hand. We don't believe in a permanent cradle-to-grave crutch. We believe that life begins at conception. But also, I am abashedly pro-life in another way. We also have to protect our vulnerable seniors at the end of life. And I'll tell you a true story. My mother-in-law, who passed away last year, was a quadriplegic for the last 2.5 years of her life because of a shower accident. She fell in the shower. We have legislation that devalues life at the legislature right now. It's right to die legislation. We have got to protect life at the beginning. We've got to protect life at the end. because she still gave back to her grandchildren until the day she died. She gave back to her grandchildren, and they will remember this for the rest of their lives. So, what else do we need to do? Well, there's another initiative that I have. It's called 5 for 5. We need to raise your hand if you think we should lower our sales tax from 6.875 down to 5%. There's a few of you in the room. I'm not surprised. We can do that. We can reduce sales tax and get us in line with our neighbors in Iowa, which impacts who? You, our guys in South Dakota. The students that were here, they just left. They're from South Dakota. They can go across the border and save themselves a pile of money. Why? Because our sales tax is out of line. And we can do it by reducing reducing the spending that we have at the state capitol. Prime example. Did you know that your tax dollars went to a protest group at the governor's mansion? It's a group called Urban Emerge. When we had the Philando Castillo protests, there were paid protesters with your tax dollars being incentivized, showing up to get paid at the governor's mansion. Does that not make you angry? As with me as governor, there will be an end to useless, unnecessary spending. We can reduce it, we can do it, but you need a fighter, a passionate fighter, not an angry fighter. I'm a passionate fighter for you, the taxpayers of Minnesota, and the people who live here. I hope you support my campaign. I'm Senator Dave Osmek. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Johnson, please.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here too, and not just for showing up tonight, but many of you put in many, many hours year after year or cycle after cycle to help us get elected. So thank you so much for that. I'm running for a really simple reason, to take power away from government and to give it back to the people of Minnesota. And that leads directly into my vision for Minnesota, which I happen to think is my most important job as a candidate. It's not traveling the state, it's not raising money. It is presenting a vision that not only appeals to Republicans, but actually inspires non-Republicans to take a listen to us and maybe not just vote DFL like they have all the rest of their lives. So here is my vision for the future of Minnesota. It's a state where patients actually do control their own health care, and where farmers actually do control their own property, and where entrepreneurs control their own businesses, and where parents control their own kids' education, whether they choose to send them to a public school or to a private school or to their own home school. It's a state where the American dream is alive and well for any Minnesotan who's willing to work really, really hard, because they are able to find a meaningful middle-class job that allows them to provide for their families. It's a state where we recognize as leaders that every individual in this state is created in God's image, regardless of their race or their religion or their politics, and where we are actually valuing every life in this state, whether it's the elderly, whether it's the disabled, whether it's the destitute, whether it's the unborn. We're actually valuing every life. I have a vision of a state where our governor actually understands that the Constitution is his job description and not a set of suggestions, as we've been seeing from the last 8 years. And I have a vision of a state where we've ended this bitterness and envy over income differences and this belief that the poor are poor and the rich are rich, and all we can do is just redistribute the wealth. And instead, we are celebrating people who are successful. And we are never, ever giving up on people who are poor. And we are preaching every single day a belief that the poor can become the middle class, and the middle class can become rich, and anyone who starts with nothing can achieve anything in this state. That's my vision for the future of Minnesota. It will be my mission as your governor. And so I hope over the next 6 months, for those of you who stay involved in the process, that I can earn your support for endorsement, and I want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And Keith Downey, your closing statement, please.
Well, thank you and congratulations. What a great forum event and a wonderful space and a chance to be with you here tonight. I remember back when I was thinking about running for governor, and my wife and I thought about it and prayed about it a lot. And we decided that if I did it, that I was going to be bold, and that I was going to say exactly what I thought, that I was going to propose things that I knew we needed to get done in this state in order to make this state work for everyone. And so we jumped in, and I'm bringing a different background. I had 23 years in business, 4 years as a reformer in the legislature, 4 years turning around the state of Minnesota Republican Party. And I want to bring that to the rest of the state because I think I know I have a really good sense of what we need to fix in this state. But it's way bigger than that, and it's way deeper than that for me and my wife. I remember shortly after declaring my candidacy that I had the chance to fly in and out of Minnesota twice. And both times as I came back, you know what I'm talking about. You fly into the state and you see these awesome, huge green fields just going on for mile after mile, and these local population centers, and then you see the suburbs and the skyscrapers, and you think about the size of the state and all the people down there. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, who am I to think that I can lead this state? And I remember very distinctly thinking, it's not me, it's the people of this state, it's our principles, it's our policies that we know will work. And so I am here to tell you that I am going to campaign strong, I'm going to lead strong if I'm your governor, and we're going to make this state work for everyone, because it's not right now. I grew up here, I'm proud of this state like everybody else, but there are far too many places where it's not working. We are losing great people, we are losing farms, we're losing businesses, we're losing wealth and capital out of this state. The trend lines in too many places are in the wrong direction, and we can fix it. And I hope you heard tonight that I have a lot of specific concrete proposals to do that, and I'm telling you, they will work. I have been in the legislature, I have been in the private sector, they will work. But that's not what this election is about. In the end, I'm going to leave you with a story. I was at the state fair at my little booth, and a woman came up to me from across the road, just made a beeline right up to me, came up to me and started telling me about her situation. She had lost her 2 small businesses. She lived in St. Paul, the taxes, the regulations, and then Obamacare came, and she couldn't make it anymore. And by the time she left, she had tears in her eyes. And she said, will you fight for me? 8 years in politics now, no one has ever said that to me. Will you fight for me? Because if you do, there are so many of us out there, and we will be with you. People, that is what this election is about. People have totally lost confidence in the political class. They have lost confidence in government because of all the entrenched special interests, all the cronyism. They are sick and tired of what's been happening in Washington and St. Paul, and you know what? So am I. We got a chance to be a great state again, but it's not going to happen if we just live with what we've had for the last 8 years out of D.C. and St. Paul. We can turn this thing around, but we have got to believe in our people again. I am here to tell you that I believe in you. Every single person in this room, I believe in you. I trust Minnesotans, not bigger government, for our future. I know we can turn this thing around and have a great future for our state. And I'm Keith Downey. I'd love to have the chance to be your governor and do it with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Downey and candidates. This concludes our gubernatorial forum, which has been sponsored by the SMSU College Republicans. Thanks to our media panelists, Mike Lamb of the Marshall Independent and Dan Paluk of Marshall Radio. We also thank our media partners, The Uptake, Marshall Radio, and Studio One. And thanks again to the SMSU Faculty Association, the statewide interfaculty organization, the SMSU Student Fee Activity Committee, and the Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce. And most of all, thank you, candidates, for coming this distance to learn and engage with us about the issues of interest in our region. We look forward to seeing you coming back. If I can offer you some incentive, looking around the room and recognizing some faces, the number that's on your minds currently is 1,320, and I won't embarrass you by asking you to identify the math behind it, but that's the 60% you need of the approximately 2,200 delegates at the State Republican Convention next June in Duluth. Of that 1,320, I think you've had a chance to get a good exposure and contact tonight with perhaps 1% to 2% of the number you need on June 1st. So we hope you come back and build on that. I'm David Sturrock, and I've been your moderator tonight. From the Student Center on the campus of Southwest Minnesota State University, this has been the Southwest Minnesota Forum featuring Republican candidates for governor. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good evening.